My wife had a dream, and it was so long and detailed. This is not a kind of dream that you dream from your flesh. And it's about the Philippines, the United States, and I guess the world fighting against the disease they're trying to bring upon us. And I asked the Lord, I prayed to the Lord after my wife told me the dream. And the Lord said, I need to release this dream. So here goes. So in the dream, my wife and I did not pray before we slept. That was something significant because she remembered in the dream that we didn't pray before we slept. And I think this signifies not being watchful, not being alert, not doing what you're supposed to do as Christians. She woke up in a hospital with many tubes attached to her body. I also had many tubes attached to my body. My wife was mad and began unplugging all the tubes. And she began complaining to the doctors and the nurses, asking them what gave them the right to bring us to this hospital and plug in all these tubes. Now, all the doctors and nurses were Chinese. And she had felt like she didn't know where she was. I was still like out of it. I wasn't conscious. And she was complaining. She was really angry. She felt like she'd been violated. In the dream, she knew that she'd been dragged somewhere far away. And, it felt like as if she'd been abducted. My wife kept asking what was the liquid that was in the tubes that was going into her body. But none of the doctors or the nurses answered my wife. So my wife began grabbing all the vials that she could see to try and read a label to see what it could possibly be. But they were all the vials, none of them had any labels on them. And then my wife found one vial, which she knew in the dream was nail varnish. And she asked the nurse if this is what was being put into our bodies. And the nurse didn't respond, so she kept asking, is this it? She kept showing her the vial. Is this it? It was a black liquid. Is this it? And the nurse, almost looking irritated, decided to nod. But my wife wasn't convinced. It seemed like the nurse was only nodding to say yes, so that my wife would stop talking. Then a nurse came and removed some vials, leaving behind one accidentally. And I believe this was like under a cupboard or under a bed. It wasn't directly in sight. It was almost as if it was hidden. And this nurse grabbed a bunch of vials, but one was left behind, and that one had a label on it. So my wife went over and picked up that vial. It was either under a bed or under a cupboard. She picked up that vial, and written on the vial it said tuberculosis. And my wife knew at that moment in the dream that that's what was being put into our bodies. She knew we were being fed through a drip disease. So my wife began searching for a way out of the hospital and began walking down a hallway where a woman came to her and spoke kindly and said to her, "You're not in the Philippines." And she called a Chinese man over, and that man began assisting her out of the building. And that man started to befriend her and was following her. But in the dream, my wife knew this guy was only pretending to be her friend. And my wife said she needed to get back to the Philippines to this man. And he agreed to help. And when they got outside the hospital, he called a tricycle. And when the tricycle driver came over, he gave the tricycle driver a nod. It looked more like a signal, like a secret communication. And when my wife got into the tricycle, she saw two children wearing Filipino uniforms. Remember, this is China, but they were wearing Filipino school uniforms, and they were out conscious with their head down on the seat in front of them. And then my wife had a vision at that moment, and she could see in the vision a factory with human body parts where they were harvesting organs. And she knew in the dream that this tricycle was not going to help them go to the Philippines. It was going to take them to a factory to harvest body parts. Then my wife got out and started asking for help to get back to the Philippines. She started asking everyone there for help. And a couple who looked Thai but not Chinese was listening to my wife, and they told my wife to come with them. And when she went to their house, it was like it looked like a place off the grid. It wasn't an ordinary home. It looked like they were living off the grid. Like they didn't want to be detected. And then they hatched a plan for how my wife was going to get back home. The plan was to catapult her through the sky by her sitting on a device that was like a seesaw and dropping a very heavy weight on that seesaw, and then she would be catapulted through the sky back to the Philippines. Sounds crazy, but remember, this is a dream. So my wife gets on this seesaw and they drop some big heavy weight, and she goes straight up in the sky into space. And when she gets into space, she starts looking down on the globe. As she starts looking down on the globe, she can see the United States. And as she looked down at the United States, she saw that there was a dark force there. And the dark force she had seen when she was in the hospital. And it was the same dark force that she felt and saw when she was in the hospital in the United States. And she saw Captain America fighting this dark force. And she said to herself in the dream, America is fighting against the same thing that I was fighting against. Then the dream ends. Now, when she told me this dream, immediately, the Lord revealed to me that Captain America was Donald Trump fighting for the United States against that dark force. And when I prayed to the Lord said, pray against this. He didn't go into detail. And whatever they infected my wife and I with in the dream, it seemed like we got infected because we didn't pray before we went to sleep. And I think that was significant. That was about, if you're not a prayerful Christian, if you're lukewarm, you're not following God, being obedient, you'll be exposed. But the Lord said we need to pray. So take this seriously, take it back to God, and be prayerful. We can stop these things through prayer. So let's be praying. Amen. God bless you all.